Hello and welcome to the D
and A of Home Interiors, the podcast which is all about empowering you to make confident interior and furnishing decisions for your home. I'm Audrey, founder of Audrey Whelan Interior Design.
And I'm Deirdre, founder of youfurnish.com, such 100 plus furniture retailers on one website. The DNA of Home Interiors is proudly sponsored by checkatrade.com. If you need help with your next home improvement project, you can search from over 39,000 recommended, vetted and monitored trades on checkatrade.com.
So today's episode is all about gardens and outdoor spaces. So not just about planting, but Deirdre and I were really keen to have a conversation about how we furnish and decorate the outdoor space, as well as what kind of greenery we can bring in. And we're particularly keen to explore how the garden links into the home, and also touching on other outdoor spaces such as roof gardens and balconies as well. So we're delighted to have a very inspiring guest joining us today. Our guest is Ciar Byrne, who is the gardening columnist for The Lady magazine and also a garden designer. She's worked as a journalist for more than 20 years and about 10 years ago made her inroads into garden design. So without further ado, I'd love to pass you all over to Ciar herself, who will tell us a little bit more about her background and how she started in garden design. Welcome, Ciar.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me. And that was a lovely introduction. Actually, the garden design has come slightly more recently. It began about 10 years ago. I moved with my husband and young family to East Sussex from London, and for the first time had a garden of my own and started gardening with a toddler and a newborn in tow, and started writing about that for our local magazine. And then thought I wanted to get a bit more knowledge. And so I went to our local agricultural college at Plumpton in East Sussex and studied on a couple of the RHS horticulture courses. So I began by actually getting the solid horticulture under my belt. And I volunteered in a garden near us, a beautiful garden called Charleston, which was the home of the Bloomsbury set. Virginia Woolf's sister, Vanessa Bell, who is an artist, lived there with her painting partner, Duncan Grant. And so I volunteered in the beautiful garden there. And it was more recently, actually, that I went to the English Gardening School, which is based at the Chelsea Physic Garden, and studied garden design under Rosemary Alexander, who's a very inspiring garden designer and teacher.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you tell us what you've enjoyed particularly then in the garden sphere since you've started?
Well, I think that what I really like is a sort of quite a naturalistic approach to gardening, but I also am very interested in what you discussed in your introduction, which is this idea, which is really relevant at the moment, of linking our house and garden, and of the garden almost becoming an outdoor room. And everybody has their own style. I mean, I think that in the past, there was a very sort of constricted approach to gardening. You had to do things in a certain way, and you had to mow your lawn so that your neighbours thought you were doing it properly. And I think these days people have a more relaxed approach to gardening. I mean, that's why I love Charleston. It was that artistic idea of gardening. So I think for me, what I personally like is the sort of artistic, romantic idea. But I think that's why it's so interesting to talk about the house and garden together, because we all have our own interior style. You might be sort of crafty and bohemian, or you might be minimalist, or more sort of classic, formal, contemporary. And actually, it's a really good idea to think about how you can bring that outside and reflect your personality in your outdoor space.
Yeah, because this is where I feel like things really have changed, kind of, I suppose, really maybe what would you say over the last generation, but then it's escalated even more over the past few months of lockdown to do with the pandemic. But where I've really seen that, before, as you said, it used to be sort of more about the mowing the lawn and maybe, thinking much more about, the greenery as a starting point. And then you might, buy a set of patio furniture and put it out there, maybe almost as an afterthought. Whereas now I really feel that, there's so much scope to embrace the space, almost like you would a room, and to say at the very beginning, okay, well, how are we actually going to plan this out? So not just in terms of sort of lay down grass and, oh, shall we just stick a bit of a patio near the house, but really looking at different zones within the garden and actually looking early on then at the types of furniture and equipment that you want to put in. So if it is a sofa, that, you're actually planning that early, looking at the things that would go in. But what I'm curious to know, Ciar, is any clients you've worked with, do you feel that things have changed in that regard?
Well, I'm sort of starting out in terms of garden design, so the garden writing is more sort of where my experience lies. But as in my garden writing, I have interviewed and spoken to some really top garden designers, including people like Jo Thompson, who's amazing. She's one of the sort of top Chelsea people. And yeah, I think that's entirely true. And I think that you see it in architecture. So I think there's this great trend now, and I know you've spoken about it in previous episodes, to have open plan living. But one thing that is becoming increasingly popular is actually connecting the house and garden through architecture. So we might have bifold doors that open up, and then you want to think about the surface that you're stepping out onto. And sometimes people like to have the same surface, so you might have tiles or poured concrete that you have in your open plan living area at the back of the house, and you could step out onto the same, or you want that sort of tactile nature of something pleasant. So it might be decking, but you want to make sure that it's sort of lovely and soft to walk out onto. And as you say, sofas have become increasingly popular, outdoor sofas, and you can now get a range of outdoor mats and rugs, so you can sort of decorate and style, particularly that area closest to the house, in the same way that you might do the interior.
Yes, I think this is a fascinating point. So growing up, everybody's house that I knew, they had the kitchen, which led to a sort of a back kitchen. And then there was a door that typically maybe didn't have glass or had a little bit of shaded glass. And that led out onto the garden. As we're now, when you see a lot of homes, in particular ones that are getting renovated or being built from scratch, they have these beautiful big windows, nearly wall to wall, floor to ceiling. And it just brings that outdoor in rather than it being through 2 or 3 different doors that you had to go to your outdoors. Now, the thing that I love about it, and it's something that you mentioned, Ciar, is actually the flooring and keeping that consistent. So if it's tiles that from your kitchen out. And I've also noticed that a lot of people have actually kept the lip, because usually when you're stepping over a door, there's a threshold, but actually it's actually completely flat. So when you push back all your bifold doors, it does feel like one room, and that you can step out with that same pattern, and it's all one. I think it's one of the best uses of making the garden more accessible and making it another room.
I completely agree. I think it's great if you can do that. So, I mean, you can step out onto the same surface. That's a really nice idea. But you might choose just to have something quite tactile that you could step out onto that's slightly different. But I think you're right. Having that same level is a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, a great example actually of maybe what you are thinking about, Ciar. I came across this recently in somebody's house that they'd recently refurbished it. They put a parquet floor inside and they replicated a similar pattern but in a brick outside on the ground. So it's 2 quite different textures, but it just looked so great because it was kind of unified through the scale and the pattern of it.
Well, that was one thing that I was going to say. Although it's really nice to carry on that outdoor surface to have the same as the indoor, you do have to think about a couple of things, one of which is drainage. So you have to, once you're getting outside, you're going to have to break up that surface in some way. And the other thing is wildlife. So you don't want to have too much of a sheer surface that plants and wildlife can't penetrate. So, I mean, there's quite a popular look at the moment, which is to have that lovely smooth surface, but to break it up and have sort of areas of planting. So once you get outside, you might want to include sort of spaces that can be used for drainage and also for wildlife.
Yeah, that's
It's funny that
point. You go ahead.
So, folks, we're all recording remotely given COVID, so we will be jumping over each other at times, so you'll have to bear with us on that one. What I was going to say is I'm down in Lisbon at the moment, and what I've noticed in a lot of the car parks, rather than having it completely concreted, they actually have sort of the outlay of a little hexagonal tile, but in the middle it is clay, and your grass can grow up through it. It's something that I've seen in a few driveways in the UK, but it's actually a great way to break up the surface. It continues to be sort of very favourable for wildlife, and of course you've got the drainage around it. So maybe there's other solutions like that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And actually, do you know what, Ciara? I was just thinking when you mentioned about like that reason for the hard surface, and then exactly the example you've given Deirdre as well. Just, this is exactly why I always shy away, when clients say to me, oh, can you help design the garden? And I think, well, like I'm rubbish at plants, I can't keep them alive, so I'm definitely not going down that route. But then sometimes I do think, well, I suppose in terms of surfaces and materials and so on, it can't be that different. But what I love is hearing input like that, talking about wildlife and things, which absolutely I have to say are things that are kind of just not normally on my radar. So yeah, brilliant to think about these things.
Well, I suppose that's showing how we're talking about how the outdoor can be a room, but yeah, it is also the outdoors. And that's why, if you're able to, it's a great idea to be able to employ a garden designer because there are all those elements that you need to think about that wouldn't necessarily come to mind. And one thing that we were taught on my garden design during the training was, because people don't necessarily think about how much a garden might cost, to think about how much you would spend on your kitchen. And actually, if you want that sort of garden, that sort of quite chic looking garden, you might be looking at a similar ballpark figure, because hard landscaping and garden structures don't actually come that cheap.
No, I can well imagine. Yes, yeah. And then, of course, if you're really thinking about planning the garden in that way that we're describing as a very functional space for maybe entertaining, as well as, having that impact of nature and wildlife so close to your indoors as well. I mean, it can also be great to think about lighting, for example. So if you are sort of putting down your flooring, it's a great opportunity to be able to bring your electrics outside. And then that's something that you can enjoy in the garden, isn't it? But equally, when it's winter and you're not going out there, I think it's amazing when you can actually illuminate that space and enjoy it even from indoors.
Well, in terms of lighting, there's some great uplighters that you can get that you can set into patios. I mean, I've just said that it costs a lot of money, but actually you don't have to spend a lot of money. It's entirely dependent on your budget. And during lockdown, I don't know about you, but I've been enjoying some of these Instagram posts about, mums who've revamped their entire garden on a budget of 100 quid. So it really is whatever your budget is. There are quick fixes and longer term fixes that you can achieve within that. But if you are perhaps getting an extension built, it's a really great idea, as you say, to think about the garden at the same time. And could you maybe, as part of that, build a beautiful area close to the house with electrics, with lighting that could be used for dining and entertaining?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in what you said around the timing of it. And I know that a lot of people build a house and they have this beautiful house, and around them is sort of the derelict land with some of your rubble and things sort of still left over. But actually, one friend of mine has been building a house, and the first thing they did was actually plant all of the plants around the perimeter and the garden so that they have a chance to grow. So that when they move into the house and the house is finished, it's not completely barren. Is that the right thing, or how long do you think it takes to sort of create a garden that feels a little bit natural and has had a chance for the plants to grow?
Well, I would be wary about planting before you've had building work done because, builders are wonderful, bless them, but they do have a tendency to trample over everything. And certainly in the past, I've had my front garden sort of destroyed by bags of concrete, etc. So I think it's a great idea to plan your garden at the same time as your house build. And actually, I am working for a client at the moment who's done just that. They're about to have a huge extension and renovation of the house done, but they want to start thinking about the garden now so that if there's anything the builders can do, this garden is on different levels. So they're thinking that maybe the builders could use some of the rubble that they're digging out to create a flat surface higher up. It's really good to be thinking about things like that. And if you're going to have a survey done of your whole house and garden, which you would do if you were having an extension or doing major renovations, then that would be a great time to think about what you want to do in the garden, where you want the electrics to be put in. When it comes to actual planting, I would be very wary. I mean, you could possibly put in some trees, but I wouldn't start putting in your perennials until everything is finished and you've got a lovely bed with some really good soil and preferably lots of lovely organic matter, and then you can plant. So I would probably make the planting the last thing that you do.
Quick shout out for our sponsor, checkatrade.com. Search recommended tradespeople online with checkatrade.com.
Planning is so key, isn't it? Knowing what you do want to do and then being able to factor that in with the hard landscaping and the architectural elements that are more practical to happen up front.
Yes, and you asked about how long things take to grow. Well, again, it depends on your budget. So it's always cheaper to buy young plants, but if you've got the money, you can buy a ready-made hedge or ready-made trees. It's really about your budget. But there's always quick fixes. So if you are putting in plants that are going to take 2 to 3 years to establish, you could buy some lovely pots and put them in among, pots of agapanthus or bright red geraniums, or tulips in the spring. You can easily pop those onto a flower bed, and that gives you a beautiful display for that season. And then, that gives the other plants time to bulk up, and so there's always something you can do.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It makes perfect sense that you can buy a plant that's fully mature or a hedge that's fully mature. You can buy grass now that you're laying it out. It doesn't come to mind off the top of my head, but that's a really good point to make. Then grass. I love some grass, and one thing that's coming in more and more is AstroTurf because it's quite low maintenance. Now,
yes.
I'm very anti it. I know I shouldn't be, but it's one thing that I sort of feel like as well from a wildlife perspective and actually a nature perspective. And it must be quite hard. I don't know the maintenance around it, but even with drainage and stuff like that. I suppose maybe it depends on your garden. If you've got a small city garden, it makes sense so that you don't have to have a lawnmower if you've got a very small patch. Do you see more and more people actually using AstroTurf because of the fact that it is quite low maintenance?
Well, I completely agree with you. I'm not a fan of AstroTurf. I think that my approach to garden design is definitely sustainable and eco-friendly, and I don't feel that AstroTurf really comes into that. But having said that, it does suit some people. I have a friend, exactly as you say, who has a flat in Brighton. They're lucky to have the garden flat, and they have a dog. And when they had grass, the dog would churn the lawn up. So they decided to get AstroTurf. And actually, they've made it look really good. They've got some lovely planting in there too. And it's a little sanctuary, and that suits them. So So, you know, it might suit some people.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel a bit guilty saying that I do quite like it actually in a lot of cases, but I think it is where people just know that they can't commit to the maintenance. And you think, well, then it's a decision between having a lawn that is going to look good and having one that is going to kind of stress them out because they're not going to, you know, maintain it. Or, you know, I suppose the other option is if they have the budget to maybe be able to hire somebody to cut it for them if it is a real lawn. But absolutely from a kind of sustainability point of view, yes, it's obviously much better if you can have the real deal.
Well, the
Indeed.
other options are you could, in May this year, I think there was a campaign called No Mow May. So actually not to mow your lawn, again, to encourage the wildlife. And that's a time when lots of insects are breeding. So you could have, it's a really lovely idea to leave patches of long grass, and that can be very beneficial. Or you might choose, I mean, some people do like that feel of a lawn underfoot, but increasingly a number of gardens don't have grass. You might choose just to have lovely raised beds full of vegetables and flowers, and that can provide your greenery, and then the rest could be hard landscaping. So you don't have to have a lawn unless that's your thing.
Yeah, I've really noticed that changing trend as well. And in fact, my own garden is like that. It's completely paved, but we've got ivy, which normally I would have thought, you know, I'm not a big fan of ivy, but the reason it works is because it gives loads of greenery and it actually makes the space feel quite sort of enclosed and cozy. But then I feel having grass on the ground with all the ivy will be too much. So actually it sort of balances out. But I think that's also where things like the rugs you touched on earlier, things like outdoor rugs and even some of the furniture now that you see and outdoor cushions and things, you know, they can be quite bright and vibrant. And I think that can really help in a space where it maybe, you know, it is paved and you kind of feel at first glance it's a bit soulless, or, you know, your first instinct might be that it needs grass, but there's plenty of other ways around it now.
There is, absolutely. As you say, you can buy some great outdoor cushions, accessories, some lovely chairs for not a huge amount of money that are quite funky. And then perhaps if you had some pots of really bright flowers or some raised planters with some pops of colour, like GM Totally Tangerine is one of my favourite. These things draw the eye. And, you know, then perhaps if there's areas of the garden that aren't quite so perfect, people won't notice them because they'll just notice the fun pops of colour.
And also these imperfections, like you touched on, sort of the idea of, you know, maybe intentionally not mowing your grass. Yeah, if that's your whole garden, then it causes kind of an issue, maybe with being able to move around. But if there are areas that are sort of contained, let's say, so back to maybe that hard landscaping and the planting, then I think that can look amazing, can't it? Because it's the contrast between the hard surfaces and then the more kind of free flowing sort of organic shapes that you get then from, you know, from the foliage.
I think that's absolutely right. So if you had quite a chic terrace, perhaps you might have porcelain or poured concrete, which we talked about. And then if you had a flower bed next to that, you might want to put in, very popular at the moment is this prairie style of planting. So these are herbaceous perennials. That means plants that come back year after year, and they are hardy and they can withstand quite a lot of heat and dryness, which is great for our changing climate, which is why I think they've become more popular. So I'm thinking echinacea, those lovely sort of cone flowers, the pink cone flowers, rudbeckia, which are the sort of yellow, again, big, almost daisy-like flowers, salvias, which are spires of blue and white, and geraniums do brilliantly everywhere in a garden. If you struggle to keep plants alive, plant some geraniums because they can survive absolutely anywhere. I've dug geraniums, left them in a corner, and they have rerouted themselves and carried on growing because that's how much they like to grow. And also Nepeta, which is the cat mint, that'll be popular with neighbourhood cats, and Perovskia, which again is sort of spires. In fact, the most popular variety is called blue spire. So that's the sort of plant that is quite in at the moment, but is quite hardy and tolerant in most gardens.
I think you've inspired me. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to get a geranium. I have a 100% record of killing my plants.
Okay.
Now, it's funny, a geranium everybody had them when I was growing up, and I tend to dislike things that everybody had. So they wouldn't be the top of my list for favourite plants. But if I can keep one alive, maybe they'll go up in my estimation. So it's really interesting with, the discussion around, you've got your area, your patio, you've got your grass or maybe astroturf, you've got your beds, your planters. What are you seeing in relation to people growing their own veg and composting? And I know this was something that Audrey and I were speaking about, in particular, given COVID, because I'd imagine that people have a little bit more time. It's back to, self-sourcing, self-sustainability, and maybe these trends will be on the up, which I think will be fabulous if they are.
Absolutely, they're on the up, and not just in gardens. I mean, there's been a huge rise in the number of people wanting allotments, and brilliantly, a lot of young people. And I think that social media has spurred that on. So I follow quite a lot of allotment blogs and allotment Instagrammers. But yes, people can grow them in their own gardens. You don't need a huge amount of space to grow your own fruit and vegetables. You can do it on a balcony. You can do it in pots. I have turned our front garden over into growing vegetables, and I have just 4 metre by metre square raised beds in the front garden. And I like to grow there because it means I remember to water when I'm going in and out, and I can pick snails off as I'm going past. I think the thing to remember is that to grow enough to feed a whole family or even an individual, you'd have to have quite a lot of space. So go for things that you maybe can't get in the supermarket or that you really love. So you might want to grow herbs that are a bit unusual, maybe chocolate mint or pineapple mint, or blueberries do really well in pots. They need ericaceous soil, which means acidic soil. But if you had a pot of blueberries by your back door, then that would be lovely to just pick a few off and put them on your breakfast cereal. So there's I mean, the possibilities are endless, really.
What I love about that as well, and we had rhubarb in our garden growing up. So every once in a while when it was in season, you would have rhubarb crumbles or stewed rhubarb and custard. But everybody around the town seemed to have a different speciality in their garden. So they were nearly trading every time you went to somebody's house, because you had so much rhubarb that, your family couldn't eat it all. You would bring your extra to the neighbour, and then when their tomatoes were ripe, they'd sort of bring those over when they came to visit. And actually, in hindsight, it's such a lovely thing to be able to bring to somebody's house some fresh produce that you've grown in your garden as a gift. And maybe that's something that you want to sort of, group together with your neighbours and sort of decide, what are you going to grow? And then we can trade and exchange.
I think that's brilliant. And also you can do the same with cut flowers. So I always grow sweet peas. And if I'm stuck for a last minute gift, I just get one of those little Bon Maman jam jars and then fill it with some sweet peas. And it's a lovely gift to take over to somebody's house.
Yeah, definitely agree. So speaking of eating there, outdoor kitchens seem to be something that I am seeing on a lot of TV programs, that I am seeing a lot of as well in terms of people's Instagrams. I would personally love one, but can we get an outdoor kitchen in the UK? Is it warm enough? Is it something that's a bit ridiculous because we're not going to get enough use out of it? Or what are you seeing there? I'm married to Australian, I should add, so he's a big fan of a barbecue, so I'm not sure if that counts as an outdoor kitchen or not.
I mean, I think nobody really wants climate change to be happening, but certainly here in East Sussex, it feels like our summers are very long. I suppose it does depend on where you live, but also on how sheltered your garden is. So a lot of city gardens are quite sheltered, and that can create a microclimate. I see no reason, if you enjoy being outdoors, why you can't have an outdoor kitchen. I mean, even in Scandinavia, I think that people love to be outdoors a lot of the time, don't they? So I don't think we should let our climate hold us back too much. And you're right, I think outdoor kitchens are becoming increasingly popular, and you can have almost whole units with butler's sinks outside. And again, you might want to think about, do you want to take the electric outside, or do you want to have one of these sort of gas barbecues? I think there is increasingly a trend for having it almost look like a fitted kitchen, but outside, and having bars outside so that you can entertain. And especially at the moment with COVID, now that our gardens are the spaces that we're inviting people over to, I think that trend is only going to increase.
Yeah, it's interesting with the whole outdoor kitchen idea, because that's also something I feel like I've become a kind of a bit obsessed with. And yesterday I just saw this great image, which was almost like paring the concept right back. And it was like a photograph of a barbecue, but then it had a few kind of concrete ledges beside it. So almost creating a worktop space, but without actually bringing your electrics out and, you know, making it into a sort of an indoor type kitchen outside. It gave the functionality, I suppose, of, you know, having that kitchen work surface. So maybe you could do more of your food prep outside, or when you take things off the barbecue. I know we've tended to kind of, you know, you hover around trying to find a surface to put something on. So really kind of adding, you know, a cooking environment, I suppose, around that that barbecue. And then also an outdoor tap. But, you know, plenty of people have an outdoor tap low down, but to actually be able to continue that pipe work. And this was showing like the copper pipe work just exposed along a tiled wall, and it looked absolutely brilliant. And then like a basin type sink, again, copper on this concrete worktop. So I think there's lots of ways that you can kind of achieve a really functional and great looking area to kind of facilitate more outdoor entertaining and cooking without even having to go down the whole kind of fitted kitchen route, if that is, you know, outside the budget or just not enough time left this summer, you know, to get it in.
I think you're right. They can look amazing, and I've seen some beautiful ones as well, but they are going to come at a cost. But, you know, you could just go for something as simple as a fire pit, making sure that it's on a non-flammable surface. And, you know, you could have a few chairs around a fire pit to toast your marshmallows. It's really what suits your lifestyle and budget, isn't it?
Yeah, I love
that idea.
Yeah, fire pits are amazing. I think, well, being Irish in particular, we both probably appreciate the need for outdoor heating. If you're gonna if you're going to spend any time into the evening outdoors, it's always good to have a kind of a plan B. Yeah.
But then I've seen some great images. I follow quite a lot of Scandinavian interiors and exteriors bloggers because they are just so inspirational. And actually, although it is lovely to have that fitted kitchen, you know, you could just take an old dining table outside, put it under a tree and dress it with some beautiful linens. And these don't need to be things that you've bought. You can just find what you've got in your cupboards and maybe some wine glasses and cutlery. And, you know, you can hang a lantern from a tree. So you can create. It's up to you in your levels of creativity and the time you have, whether that's something you get pleasure from. But you can make some really beautiful outdoor scenes, which you could then use to entertain your friends.
I love that idea.
Me too. I was going to say I've seen a lot more tablecloths, and I think it's because of the increase in people eating outdoors, and particularly if you have either, maybe an old sort of rustic table you take outside, or indeed something which is perhaps, you know, bottom of the shed, an old camping table, you know, and then you can dress it up quite nicely then very easily with a tablecloth, or even just some interesting fabric in the right size.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, you just need to remember to bring it in if it rains, that's all.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's a very good way as well of somebody testing, will they use their garden? Because we all have these dreams and we see these pictures and you think, I'm just going to spend all summer in the garden. And, you know, things that we've talked about, you know, and in particular, which I loved, is that you said for a garden designer, you need to think about spending the same amount as you would in your kitchen. So before you go out and maybe spend all that money, why not set up a lovely table with some dining tablecloths and your accessories under a tree, and just see if you use it before necessarily going out and spending an absolute fortune, because, you know, often we think we're going to do things, but actually finding the time and making the use out of them doesn't come quite as we had imagined.
I think that's very true. And I would always say, if you have just moved into a garden, spend at least a year watching it and thinking about it. And as you say, you could just go and sit out there and have ideas, maybe take a notebook with you and write down those ideas. So we're coming into the autumn now, and perhaps it is a bit, I mean, it depends on whether it suits you or not, but you might not want to be spending too much for the rest of this year, but you might have ideas that you could put in place over the winter so that your garden's ready for next spring. So yeah, just take the time to sit outside and see where the sun falls. I mean, this
I
is
was
one
about
thing.
to mention
Yeah,
this, actually.
Yeah, that's really important.
And that's why I'd wait the 12 months so that you can see
Yes.
right throughout the year where it gets light and where it doesn't.
And then think about how you want to use your garden. So do you want to take a coffee outside in the morning? So then think about where the sun is in the morning, and can you put a bench there or a seat there with a little table so that you can take your coffee out? Where does the sun fall in the evening for that glass of wine with friends? So just take the time to go and suss all of that out.
I love that idea. And actually, I find inspiration from maybe gardens I've been in on holidays. And when we were in Italy last year, I just found it too hot in the middle of the day. And I ended up they had a hammock under a tree in the shade. And I'd go over there and read my book when I was getting too hot in the sun. And it's realising how you want to use that garden. So if you do want to read out there, of course, reading in the bright sunlight is hard as it is. So you probably need someplace shaded. Or are you going to bring out a parasol? But it goes back to what you've said around that morning coffee. What are you actually going to do there? And bringing into account then not only yourself, but of course, family members. If you've got children, do they need a play area or a swing, right down to, your other half, or if you're going to have guests over or not, really sort of try and think about how you're going to use the area.
Absolutely. And I think shade is very important. So as you say, particularly on a day in the middle of summer, it can be almost too hot to sit out in the bright sunlight. So do you want to think about a pergola, which you could grow a beautiful clematis over, and that might provide shade? Or increasingly popular this summer are these garden sails. So, they can be...
What do you mean by a garden sale? So I'm assuming it's not something that's on sale, as in it's on an offer.
No, sail as in a sail on a boat. So they do look a little bit like the sort of sail you might get on a yacht. And then, so they might have three or four.
Is it a triangle shape, sort of?
Well, it could be a triangle or it could be a rectangle, but then it's suspended. It could be from a post or from a fence post. And that provides shade. So you might want to put one over a table. But again, it's not, you've got that lovely feeling of indoors, outdoors. So it's not creating too much of a sort of oppressive space, but just giving you a little bit of extra shade.
I've been doing my own version of that, Ciar, actually, this summer, because we've been outdoors so much more. We've got 2 clotheslines, and I've got these amazing fabric samples from a company, and they're like sheer fabrics, but they're just thick enough to block out a little bit of light. So just pinning them up across the clotheslines, and then, I mean, the great thing about anything like that you can move around is then obviously you can sort of control that light and shade through the day. You're not limited to the area it's in is either shaded or not.
Yes. And then you could also think about planting trees. So I am a huge fan of silver birches, which just have those beautiful white trunks and very slender white trunks, and they're deciduous. So in winter, they're not going to create too much shade, but in summer when you need it, you've got that lovely sort of green shade. So you might want to plant some of those near to a patio so that you've just got shade falling over a corner of it during the day.
Yes, my uncle has the most beautiful garden, and he has, well, it's not his, but there's a weeping willow in the neighbour's garden, and it comes right up over the wall, and it's the most dramatic sort of waterfall effect. But he has a bench underneath it where he can go and sit down at the bottom of the garden. And, even when they have a lot of garden parties, actually, and he leaves like tables with everybody together. But then what you see is that people actually sort of pair off, and they'll go down and sit on the bench for a little sort of side chat. And I think that's lovely as well, that you have different areas. So we don't just need to have a patio with our table and chairs, and that's the only place we can sit. Create like little nooks and crannies around the garden. And whether it's, you have, one thing that we didn't speak about is actually sculptures. Whether it's a little bit of a water feature, or I've seen wonderful effects created with outdoor mirrors as well. So creating those little nooks and crannies, if your garden is big enough to find these little sort of secret sanctuaries.
Well, I think that's really true. And one idea is this idea of the garden room. So I know we've been talking about the outdoor room. I don't mean that. I mean almost having separate areas of the garden, like you might have rooms in a house. So you've got your dining area, you've got your vegetable area, you might have an area for the children to play, which you might want to put some of that sort of, there's various surfaces that are good for children to play on underneath. And then you might want to have, so you can use planting to create these rooms. So you might want to have a flower bed with some quite tall plants in, and behind that almost a little secret area. And as you say, sculptures are a great way of drawing the eye. So if you had a focal point at the end of your garden, that might draw people down the garden. Mirrors can create the illusion of space if done right. I've seen some mirrors done wrong as well. And you mentioned water features, which I think is really interesting because I think it's lovely to have water in the garden. But I think people don't always realise how much work goes into creating a water feature. So whether it's a pond or something more elaborate, like a sort of, these sort of fountain walls, or you need to think about whether you want running water or still water. So still water can be problematic because it can very quickly attract insects like mosquitoes. It can attract algae. So if you're going to have running water, which counteracts those problems, you need to have a pump. So you need to think about how you're going to put in your pump system. That's not to say don't have water, because water really adds magic to a garden. But you do have to be aware that there's going to be quite a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with a water feature.
Yeah, and speaking of water, and this is probably my last question, hot tubs, pools.
Yes.
They're the
Yep.
thing of dreams in terms of Instagram pictures when you see some of these beautiful outdoor swimming pools. And I think a hot tub is, it's that, I think I read that it's one of the items that can really help if you've got a short-term holiday let actually increase the value. So are these gimmicky? Have you seen them used? Do many people put them into their garden in your experience? And if they do put them in, do they get the use out of them?
Well, I think, again, it comes down to your budget and how much space you've got. And I would say privacy. So if you are perhaps in a semi or a terraced house and the gardens are quite close together, are you overlooked? Do you mind your neighbours overlooking you if you're getting into the hot tub? Do your neighbours want to see you getting into the hot tub? There's also outdoor showers are quite popular at the moment. And so you just need to think about where you put it. So perhaps put it somewhere that you're not going to be too overlooked. Of course, there's also this, you see beautiful images in the garden magazines of natural outdoor pools. You're really going to have quite a lot of space and quite a lot of money if you're going to be able to afford one of those. But yeah, I think if a hot tub is what you want, go for it, but just try and think about privacy.
Yeah, I think on the privacy note, actually, some of the ideas you talked about around sails or, ways to sort of provide shade could maybe also be used then if you're concerned about people in upstairs windows being able to look down, that you can have a bit of privacy overhead, particularly if it's something that you can move around in terms of the privacy.
Yes. So, but it's really what you want, isn't it? I know my daughters would love a hot tub in the garden, but I'm not quite so sure.
Well, I'm surprised that you mentioned an outdoor shower. So this is something that we had an outdoor bathroom in a very nice hotel that we stayed in one of the islands off Thailand. And I must say, it just felt like it connected you with nature. And going back even further, when I was backpacking, I did this gibbon experience tour in northern Laos. And you went from treehouse to treehouse using zip lines. It's the stuff of fantasies, this. But you're up on this gigantic tree. You're surrounded by forest. You can hear all the animals, and they had an outdoor shower. So when you showered, the water just fell onto the trees that were below, so a massive drop, and it felt like a big sort of rain shower. And as you're standing there, surrounded by plants, surrounded by nature, listening to the animals, it's one of these experiences that has just really stuck in my mind. And I would go for an outdoor shower any day over the pools or the hot tubs, but I didn't think you could even consider that.
Well, they are becoming increasingly popular. So I know that demand for them is on the up. And actually, you've just made me think. I mean, one thing I was going to mention is how jungle planting is very popular. And it can work really well in small gardens because it almost increases the space because of that feeling of lushness. Now, if you were to combine an outdoor shower with a jungle garden, then you could have that experience right in the middle of a city.
Yeah.
Audrey, I think you could put one in outside of your office. You've got that little,
Yes, kind of a courtyard. I've already
Yes.
been eyeing up a few photos with amazing sort of like Moroccan tiles, you know, and then maybe a copper or brass exposed pipe, you know, at the shower. And yeah, I actually, like you, I stayed somewhere with an outdoor shower. It was in Thailand. And I also just have this real vivid memory of just how amazing that was. And it's always been kind of there in my mind that, you know, if it was ever sort of, if I was ever brave enough, I suppose, or if it felt like a semi-normal thing to do, that I would. But I mean, especially if you've got, you know, a few people at home, you can never have too many showers, really, can you? So it's always
There's a house just quite close by to us which has an outdoor shower tucked in their garden, which is right next to a railway line, so tucked into quite a small space with some beautiful decking around it. And actually, I think it is just that feeling of being outdoors. Can you imagine while the train rushes by, having your shower? But it sounds a bit odd, but actually, I think it could be quite appealing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ciar, that has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think my 2 takeaways is that I can have my outdoor shower and I'm going to see if I can keep a geranium alive. But I think one of the key things as well is in terms of if you are looking for a garden design, the stuff of dreams sort of equated to the cost that you would spend on your kitchen. It's been fascinating to learn those nuggets of wisdom from yourself. And, you know, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure everybody has enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we can all go out and enjoy this sunny day that we have today.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Ciar. If you enjoyed our podcast, we would be delighted if you could rate, review, and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. This will help others who are seeking home and furnishing advice and inspiration discover the DNA of home interiors. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at the DNA of Home Interiors.
If you are looking for inspiration and help in designing your home interiors, take a look at Audrey Whelan's masterclasses on audreywhelan.com/events. And don't forget to check out youfurnish.com, a search and comparison website which helps connect people with amazing furniture from over 100 retailers. We designed it to solve the problem we and thousands like us faced furnishing our homes. And now we are really excited that everyone can search, discover, compare and shop for their home all in one place.
Thank you to our sponsor checkatrade.com for their support in bringing this episode to you. And most importantly, thank you all for listening today.
We hope you can join us next time.